to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be getting all the transmission components ready and put back onto the engine. Let's get started. All right, we're going to start off with looping up the release bearing. So all we have to do is lubricate these ends here and then the middle section here. And then we could put this back into the transmission. This typically will be pivoting against here like so. And then this piece here will hook on to here. So we should take this off as well. Like so. And then we'll probably put a little bit of grease on here so it will slide into the transmission a little bit easier. You don't need a whole lot of grease on this, just some good high temp grease. I'm just using bearing grease here. Honda recommends some urea grease, the high temp urea stuff. I'm just going to use this. I've had no problems using this kind of grease before. Just any of the areas where it pivots. So like I was saying in the previous video, we are reusing these components. So it's good to just re-grease them, make sure they all move properly. There you go, it's set up like this and it can be popped right back in there now. So before we do that, I'm going to just grease up the shaft a little bit. Alright, now that you've got the bearing mostly assembled, it's falling apart, but you'll have to hold it in. Put the release shaft in first. So you slide that in on the side. And you'll see it peek out here. Gonna have to do this at the same time. Put this back like so. And hold this together. And then this goes in like this. This bottom part of the spring goes under here. Like that. Make sure we hold everything up so it doesn't move. Pull the shaft back a little bit. And then we have to hold it in place while we push it. And lift the fork. There you go. There you go. Like that. And then we'll put in the bolt loosely to check if the fork is seated properly. All right, so it's loosely fit. Now we'll just get a light and we'll shine it on the back here just to make sure it is sitting properly, but you can kind of see it from the side here. And it's hard to see on this side, but I'm just gonna double check real quick. So that's good. We can now torque down the bolt. We're good. All right, guys, so now we can set up the engine hoist so that we can get the engine off the engine stand so we can start bolting up the transmission components. All right, I put a towel over the engine so that I don't end up damaging a freshly painted valve cover. Now I'm just gonna hook up chains to this engine leveler and everything so that it spaces it out good so that I can get it right off of this engine stand. All right, there you go. Engine is all good now. We can start installing the flywheel and all those other components on there. All right, for the flywheel hardware, we are going to be running the ARP stuff that came with this engine, which is nice stuff. So we'll need to apply some blue Loctite on here, as well as some ARP super lubricant or whatever it is, the ultra torque lubricant underneath the head of these bolts. And they're 19 millimeter. So they'll be torqued down to about 95 foot-pounds, which is a lot of torque, but we'll do them in 2 steps, maybe like 50 and then another 45. But these are all the bolts for it. And it looks like there was some previous Loctite on here. But let's get the flywheel on there first. All right, so we'll start applying the blue Loctite on all the threads and then the lubricant, and then we can just start threading them in. Alright, so we're going to have to torque these in a crisscross motion, but before we do that, we have to lock the flywheel in place so it doesn't spin while we torque this down. So how I'm going to do that is I'm just going to take a clutch bolt and put a wrench to here, one of the points on the transmission, so it actually locks the plate. I'll show you guys how to do that. It's easier to find than the flywheel tool that locks it. So let's just quickly tighten this first. Nice. All right, guys, so that's the setup here with the wrench. I just took a 14mm, loop it through a transmission hole here, and I locked it right here with a old pressure plate bolt. So now we could be able to torque this, and the flywheel will actually not move. As it rotates, it's just gonna get stuck here. All right, I'm gonna start off by torquing everything crisscross at 60 foot-pounds. Then I'll set it to 95 foot-pounds and then just finish it off. .95, same kind of thing. All right, now we're going to be installing the clutch. I didn't have, obviously because of this, it's a used clutch, I didn't have the tool for it, so I actually 3D printed one. There was one on Thingiverse, so someone created this and it fits perfectly in here for aligning the clutch. So I 3D printed this, and then we're going to be reusing the ARP pressure plate bolts as well. With these, we're supposed to apply the ARP loop on the threads as well as the washer and underneath the head as well. So we'll just lube all these up and then we'll start putting them in. With these, I don't think you need to lock it. I don't think it actually spins when we torque it down. So we could easily do the 25 foot-pounds. Switch over to the smaller torque wrench. All right, now it's time to fit the transmission onto the engine. And we're pretty close to finishing. Alright guys, so after a bunch of struggling, managed to get the housing together. I just took some of the bolts and gently clamped it together and bolted it through. Now I'm just gonna bolt it all up. I think these are supposed to be torqued at either 47 or 43 foot-pounds. So we will go ahead and torque them down. The weird thing is the transmission bolts that came with this motor are all a little bit different length. I thought they were all supposed to be the same. So we'll try and figure out where each one of these go, but it looks like we've got 3 different sizes here. We've got 65mm ones, and 2 60mm, and 1 70mm. If I remember correctly, they should all be roughly around the same. I think only the back 2 here are 65mm. So we'll use the 65mm on the back here. And then these might be a little bit too short. These are supposed to be 70mm. I'll see if I have any other 70mm bolts. Alright, in my bucket of bolts, I managed to find a couple 70mm bolts. I looked on the Honda website and these are supposed to be 70mm each. So all 3 of these are 70mm. So I don't know why we have 60mm bolts, but we'll use these 70s. Yep. And then the 65s for the back. And we'll torque them down to 47 foot-pounds like the Integra manual says. Alright guys, after you've been cleaning up the threads on these two bolts, they're pretty far stretched. They won't torque down anymore. Looks like I'm going to have to helicoil these. So, guess this is going to be halted until I actually fix these threads. That really sucks. Aside from that, the other three are fine. It's just these top two. So we don't want to have it loose and, transmission not being held in place properly. So I guess I'll have to helicoil everything. That's no way around it. Just those two. Well guys, I'm super disappointed with how this turned out. Two of the transmission bolt holes are completely stripped out on the engine. I have since just cleaned up the garage and set the engine aside because I can't work on it anymore with the stripped threads and all, because they just won't tighten until I fix those threads. Now I have ordered a thread repair kit on Amazon, and I'm just waiting for that to arrive. It's a helicoil type of kit. So once that arrives, we will try and fix those threads, which will be on the next video. Now, when I look back, I do remember that those transmission bolts were loose when I first got the engine. I didn't think anything of it, but they were the only bolts that were loose on the transmission side. Now, when I was trying to mount the engine onto the engine stand, again, they felt a little stripped when I was trying to bolt them in, but again, I didn't think anything of it. So I think the engine came to me already stripped. Considering when I reassembled the engine, I noticed that those bolts are a little bit too short for bolting on the transmission onto that side. They're actually supposed to be 70 millimeter length, but they were only 60 millimeters. That's a whole centimeter of length missing from the bolt, which can cause strippage. Now, this engine had its share of bottlenecks. I just didn't show them all on the video or even show any on the video, but I could talk about it right now. I give you a good example is the rear transmission, not the rear transmission, but the rear alternator bracket. Now, when I was unbolting the rear alternator bracket, I noticed that it came off really easy and it felt like the bolts were completely stripped. Now, when I was trying to reassemble, I noticed that it didn't thread in. Now, what I noticed was these bolts were actually too short for the bracket. Now, what happened to the original bolts? No idea. Now, the previous owner probably just thought, oh, I'll just use some short bolts that kind of thread in and see where it goes. Well, you guessed it. What happened with these short bolts is it stripped the threads on the block. Now I have tapped new threads into the block, and fortunately the alternator bracket bolted and torqued right back up, no problem. Same method didn't work for the transmission, as you can see when I did try to rethread it and retap threads and all. It's still completely stripped out. Now the bolt just completely keeps spinning in there, and a whole bunch of aluminum debris did come out of those holes. Now, it's super unfortunate, but that is the reality of used engines. You're always going to hit bottlenecks, especially if you get it from people that used to own the engine that didn't know what they were doing, essentially. There was, like I said, there was a lot of stuff missing on this thing, and there was a lot of headache while going through this whole rebuild. But we're getting closer. We just need to fix those threads, and then we're almost ready to drop the engine into the car. Anyways, guys, I hope some of this video helps you guys out. If you haven't already, please comment, like, and subscribe, and share my videos. As always, guys, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.